Hi, everyone, and welcome to our monthly podcast. We have the one, the only, the venerable Mr. S.G. Anon joining us for yet another roundtable discussion for the month of December on all things financial, geopolitical, and other. Always look forward to getting his insights. It's always a good, meaty, substantive conversation. So if you're new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share as it helps the channel grow and others to gain the knowledge you're currently being afforded. S.G., how are you doing today, good sir?
Doing well, John. Thank you for having me back.
It's always an honor. I always look forward to this, and I hope you do, and I know our audience does as well. So, SG, to kick things off, I'm going to show you a couple of clips that we talked about initially in our offline discussion. You posted this clip last week on your Telegram, whereby you showed that Iraq is in the process of implementation with respect to the digital dinar. How significant do you think this is for them to return to the international stage, and how, in your estimation, does this connect to Ripple and the new blockchain financial system as well?
Well, it's very interesting. I think that the digital component of the landscape, the ecosystem inside Iraq, that's a prerequisite, a necessary requirement for the Iraqi countryside and the Iraqi economy to be readmitted to the international stage, because the entirety of the international arena is moving towards a financial intermediary system that is entirely underpinned with an electronic infrastructure. It'll have a physical, real-world correlative in value, but the entirety of that instantaneous transmission and transactive capabilities is going to be underpinned through an electronic, digital, cyber underpinning, for lack of a better expression. And so looking at what is happening right now on the ground inside Iraq, and this is sort of the same flavor that we've talked about many times on this podcast before. It's yet another nail. It's yet another hook on that pegboard, if you will, going towards the end of the final picture of having a system revalued internally inside Iraq and then readmitted to world markets with different valuations for those assets. And that's going to change a lot of how the world markets flow, especially with respect to oil, because you're going to see significant changeovers in how oil is commoditized and valued coming out of the entirety of the Gulf region. That really can't be understated in this process. And so looking at their implementation of a digital side of their currency should be our giant red flag that they are moving forward rapidly, that they're expecting to be underway relatively soon by a longitudinal comparison, right? This is a process that's been years in the making since the first Trump administration. It's certainly been going on with respect to planning in the background since the first Obama administration, and the plan to sort of get out from underneath this largesse military central bank industrial complex that's been, harassing the world for the last 100 and some odd years, just in its current form. So this is a very significant marker, and I would look at this as preparatory for, towards a new step. And I would also look at this, if I may, John. You asked a second ago how this sort of ties back into things like XRP and digital currency. I would expect this to cause significant upheaval geopolitically, which should apply a significant amount of financial pressure to current world markets, because you have a change that cannot be stopped. You have, a revaluation in one region that's sort of popping off. You've had smaller RVs already happening in other regions around the world, to include Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and even in the South American continent with respect to Argentina, and that entire undertaking by President Milei, which is really just a smokescreen, a public covering for an entire revaluation of the Argentinian economic base. This is a really impressive and incredible time to be alive. I'm very excited for what this digital dinar movement inside of Iraq actually harbingers for us as we go forward.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, I remember a couple months ago in October, hard to believe it's been that long already, that you said that you thought that a revaluation for October would be a bit ambitious, but now here we are in December. It seems to be, at this point, from what we can see from the timelines and the movement of things, as we discuss every month, that it's really trending heavily towards the first quarter of 26, because you've got, the midterms coming up. You got Victory Day on July 7th, about, obviously, in the Constitutional Republic. So he's going to have to get momentum in the first quarter or two to establish those, key points. And you've got an incoming crash coming as well, we believe, in the late first quarter. So things have to start really matriculating at this point. So yeah, I'd say that you're right over the target with that, as usual. I want to play another clip for you here, SG, that we put on our Telegram a couple weeks ago. It's from a recent X22 financial show that Dave produced. He dropped some extremely significant comms within the soundbite. So what I want to do, SG, is play this clip for you. It's about a minute and a half. And then when we're done, I'll ask you the question so you and everyone can take a listen accordingly.
Now, 589 Bull decided, okay, let's dissect this for a sec and let's see what the blueprint really is. And this is what 589 Bull says. Trump just laid out the blueprint for the next financial era right in plain English. He's not talking about imports. He's talking about replacing the IRS, detonating the debt-based system, and funding America with pure external revenue. Read what he actually says. Importers burn through the stock up Dodge. Now they're trapped. Everything they buy gets hit. Tariff revenue is about to explode vertically. America becomes a trade-powered superstate. Anyone opposing it is serving hostile foreign interest. If SCOTUS blocks this, they're siding with the global parasites, not the American people. This is the keystone to the entire monetary reset. GLUSD as the digital dollar. XRP XDC settling global flow. ISO 20022 rails snapping together. Ripple plus BNY Mellon wiring the system. BRICS commodity shift accelerating. Iraq's IQD prepping for international use. Tariffs funding the transition away from the income tax. It's all connected, and Trump knows exactly what he's doing. He's daring SCOTUS to kill the revenue engine powering America's comeback. Refunds, please. That would make the entire global architecture being built right now. SCOTUS isn't suicidal. This is the moment the old system dies and the new one comes online. You're watching the reset happen in real time. And that.
So you just heard all the SG pretty much lay out articulately against what you just shared. So after hearing this amazing reveal, do you think Dave is a white hat that's working on behalf of the Trump administration is being used to drop comms to his audience, given his large online presence? And if so, the very fact that he's revealing this now after many years about saying nothing about XRP, nothing about the dinar, all of a sudden now he's saying it during the holidays. Would you infer that this means possibly coming early 26, we will see the realization of said reset that this community has long been anticipating?
Well, I have to say that's a mouthful and a heck of a question. I'm going to take it in a couple of stages. The first part with Dave being a white hat, I couldn't possibly begin to speculate. I will say that Dave has had the current FBI Director Kash Patel on his program a couple of times prior to this administration taking office. I think that your audience is savvy enough to know and intelligent enough to know that anytime a personal connection like that is forged, there's always a communication pathway that stays open in the background. To what extent that pathway is used is really a matter of professional courtesy between two individual human beings. And we sort of have to extend some trust there that there's not corruptive activities in that space. But I don't think that there is any cause to believe that. I just look at it and I think to myself, if we had an appointed white hat of some kind, I don't know as it would come directly from a podcaster who's so well known. But at the same time, and something I want to bring out and really drill down on for your audience is that President Trump, via his Truth Social profile, has highlighted a lot of what podcasters, Anons, researching commentators on X, researching commentators on YouTube have been talking about for 5, 6, 7 years that have been really written off as conspiracy theory. We have seen in this year multiple statements from President Trump's Truth Social discussing an Obama military tribunal. We've seen multiple statements discussing med beds and medical technology. We've seen a ton of references to the golden age of America. We've seen a ton of references to financial liberation, literally using the term Liberation Day to go back to April of earlier this year. And so looking at that entire pattern of behavior there, it stands to reason that a lot of the actual news outlets and news sources, media producers out there in the world that are onto something real, that are onto something tangible, are going to find themselves sort of looking at the same cauldron, if you will, the same overall titrated variables, the things that cannot be hidden anymore, the things that everyone sort of has to look at and acknowledge. That's coming from the president now. It's come from the president multiple times now. It's also coming from an envoy of the president of Russia over here on an X profile who's reposting, Q posts literally on his profile. So as we look at that, I think we all have to kind of acknowledge that there is a broader plan, and the plan is beginning to shape up. We are seeing these avenues, these arms come together. We are seeing the financial architecture being put out in real time. We are seeing resignations by the dozens. I mean, every single month, even just this year, we've seen tons of resignations across biotech. We've seen resignations across academia. We've seen resignations across large corporate chains. New CEOs being installed into significant tech giants. former heads of staff being or chiefs of staff sidestepping or leaving companies. And so these types of things all tying itself together, John, show us exactly what Dave was just talking about a moment ago. There is a changeover and it's happening in real time, but it's not readily apparent to your average onlooker because the smoke screen of craziness that's at the surface level consciousness allows for a great deal of that to happen seamlessly and fluidly without a lot of public bog down. And at the end of the day, we are we the people, and we should have the power, and we're on our way back to having that power. But at the present time, in some ways, John, I think we can also acknowledge that as we awaken to these things together, and as we look at our collective understanding evolving together, we really would have been in our way rather than helpful to ourselves had we been running this boat from the very beginning.
Yeah, no, that's all valid stuff that you're sharing. And then the second part of the question, because I know I threw a lot at you, just to break it down a little bit more. And this is your own personal take. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball of the timing except for God. Would you say that maybe because he's bringing this out, that was published on November 24th, as you saw the article, so it was just the week of Thanksgiving, a couple weeks away from where we are now. Do you think because of the timing of it for the holidays, Dave is sort of inferring first quarter of next year, we should start to see some of these financial things materialize?
Well, it's interesting. I think that if I was to speculate, and it would just be speculation, I could see the holiday season carrying through to the end of the year, seeing some of those first quarter reconciliations. And I could actually see a little bit of quiet in the financial space in the first month of the year as some of those end of year reconciliations take a while to filtrate through the system. We do have the ERS, IRS paperwork that is still being sent out. A lot of it's being processed completely differently at Treasury. But of course, that's not going to be publicly proclaimed for everyone until there's such a time ready to transition this over. So I could see something beginning to pick up and really grabbing the public's attention with respect to domestic and international markets starting in February and really into March. And by the time we arrive at the end of March, and again, it's not a crystal ball, but I'm just sort of seeing how these events evolve over a period of days and weeks, and sometimes it takes a little while, but I can see towards the end of March, 1st of April of 2026, some serious momentum where it's publicly obvious that there is a problem in the current financial underpinning, whether that comes from a latent SCOTUS ruling, whether that comes from a significant singular market event, whether that comes from a geopolitical destabilization, and I'm still expecting a destabilization attempt to happen in the Middle East, probably throughout this winter season and into early next year in that January, February timeframe. But looking towards the end of March, I could absolutely see the public beginning to understand that this is an evolving financial landscape, that there is a permanent change that has been achieved. And ultimately, John, as we look towards July 4th of next year, which is an extremely significant time for this particular republic, I could absolutely see the period between March and July, a period of time wherein the American people are asked to be very hands-on and very referential, if you will, in the type of system that they'd like to have, because we could see the fraud investigations, that have tied through a number of these, have tied up a number of these Democrat state lawmakers and federal lawmakers and all sorts of agencies and NGOs. A lot of that is going to be tied up in that fraud, caught up and swept up in these fraud investigations. And there's going to have to be significant and dramatic law enforcement action within the borders of the United States in order to arrive at a point where we can confidently and successfully say we are ready to reliquidate and refire this system.
Yeah, and again, in your synopsis of things, talks about the late great Kim Clement, Christmas, I shall make them happy when things seem at their worst. You were talking about the Middle East, a lot ginning up there between Iraq and Iran. I mean, they basically come out and said over the weekend on X and other channels that if they don't get off the oil system, they're on the verge of bankruptcy. So they're going to have to make a move. And, one of our team members who's pretty well ensconced in the stock market data analysis of things, we'll call it, has stated on our show before that he sees a major crash coming by at the latest March. So that falls right into line with what you were just sharing a moment ago. So thank you for that, SG. And turning a little bit our attention to the other and geopolitical side, there's been a lot of discussion, SG, in the past concerning changing the calendar back to a 13th-month calendar and putting us on the right calendar and timeline with 28 days each month, and New Year's Day actually being April 1st, because we know when they say April Fools, it means because they fooled us into thinking that it's January, when in actuality we know it's April. And not the con we've all been sold. What can you report about this, if anything, and when might you anticipate us going into this new calendar and the correct convergence of timelines?
That is a phenomenal question. And I have to say, John, that one is probably out and out above my pay grade. I will say this as we look at putting ourselves back on the celestial rhythm, which is really what we're talking about when we talk about calendars and timelines and times and feast days and certain points of the year and seasons and things of that nature. As we put ourselves back onto the celestial rhythm, slow at first and then faster and faster, there's going to become a time, or going to come a time probably not very long into the meat of that process where the questions about this 13th month, the mathematical agreement of 28 days times 13 coming out to a full year, the agreement mathematically with that and a lady's monthly cycle with respect to the reproductive side of that on the feminine side, the back of a turtle shell, all of these sorts of things. I think a lot of people are going to come around to this concept that we are off rhythm, for lack of a better term. We're out of step with one another. We're out of sync with the harmony that is God's world. And we have to right that and go back on that. And President Trump has not come out and addressed any of this in so many terms and in so many words, but he has said that it's time for us to do away with daylight savings time. That is the first volley, in my opinion, of the change that you're referencing with respect to getting us back on the calendar. We have to align our hours and our expectations and our habits throughout days and weeks and months here domestically in the United States. And then we all have to come to some sort of an agreement within the broader international dating system, how we want to recognize future commerce and future trade. And so I would look at that as a broader aspect of this Great Awakening. It would not surprise me if that particular issue took us maybe another year or two, or even towards maybe the end of this current Trump presidency, to really grapple with those issues, because we've got a lot to sort of see through until the end, right? We've got this military tribunal situation that President Trump continues to highlight with the prior administration. That's dramatic for the American people. It's going to be unprecedented. It's never happened before. We have to have some sort of recompense for the biological terrorism behind the COVID-19 pandemic and everything else that led up to that, and then everything that came immediately after the acute phase of that began. That is another original, unprecedented, sort of magnanimous and enormous undertaking that we have to see through here in the Western world. I could see on the other sides of those particular journeys of sort of having to eat those very large elephants as a culture, one after the other. When that is finally finished, I could see us turning our eyes more towards what type of rhythm we want to have from a clock time aspect, what type of rhythm we want to have from a day-night aspect, what we want a work week to look like, what we want, settling days and requirements for settling transactions across boundary lines to look like. And I could see that work taking us really between the end of this presidency and the end of this decade.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for that. Well, all these great things we just talked about are incoming in terms of the wealth transfer, reset, new technologies, cures, the arrests, and the justice that everybody is rightfully anticipating for those of us on our respective audiences in the know. It's important we don't forget, as we talked about in the last month, SG, there's real everyday good people suffering and that don't know how they're going to make it through the day, let alone tomorrow. What encouragement can you share with the audience that will give them some legitimate meat on the bone that will help these wonderful people be able to mentally cross over the Rubicon?
Well, the encouragement is always found, in my opinion, just, when we're in the heat of battle, the encouragement is always found by going general and getting off of some of the specifics, especially specifics where we can't really control or account for the exact outcome in this moment in time, right? We're speculating a little bit on some of these timelines here, but none of us knows the exact day or hour. Even the good book tells us that. And so if we were to drill down specifically on that, it becomes actually a point of contention after a certain threshold. And so to go back and get a little general and say, well, this is happening, it's coming, we have all of these different evidences to show that, and then to begin to look at the broader awakening and this broader operation, both civilian and military, that's happening all around the world, it becomes easier to assuage one's own concerns. Say, for example, as we look at the situation going on right now in the Caribbean basin and in the South American sphere of influence with the Venezuela rhetoric and all the things going on with U.S., I think it's Fifth Fleet, and a couple of other things that have been dispatched there. There is so much more happening in the southern part of the Western Hemisphere as a result of those operations than what we're being told by any media outlet, both MAGA aligned and not MAGA aligned, right? Everyone is sort of telling us one variation of immigration, states' rights and sovereignty, drug trafficking, and your standard level of criminality. What nobody is talking about is the fact that Venezuela was one of several nodes, worldwide junction points that were purposefully put in those hemispheres and purposefully established in those regional spheres of influence around the earth to control election outcomes. Venezuela is a massive headquarters. It's a giant battleground, if you will, a planning center for tremendous amounts of international election fraud. And it's not just aimed at the United States of America. As a matter of fact, they've been stealing elections out of Venezuela for at least the last 25 years. So looking at what's going on in that area of the world, what is being flushed out of that South American shelf in the very north, where you're seeing biological terrorism pathways being choked off, you're seeing black market money being strained and redirected, you're seeing a lot of panic on the ground, especially inside Colombia, as we look at those paramilitary armed groups not knowing what's going to happen if the American military decides to actually come ashore in northern South America. And you have the CIA playground inside the Venezuelan countryside, absolutely at loggerheads with itself, unable to respond because they don't know what the Venezuelan Patriot military is going to do about all of this. So looking at what's happening here, if we step back and again, we go general and get that broader perspective, we can see that there's a lot happening to move the needle forward. It's not just about protecting U.S. elections. It's about protecting everyone's elections. It's about protecting the social and cultural processes that we, the people groups in all nations, have been freely given the opportunity to choose. And some of them are only being given that opportunity for the first time over the last 10-year period. You have African nations that have not chosen their leaders in 500 years. And they're finally getting the opportunity, to take to the streets in their respective villages and townships and areas of influence and actually make those decisions for the first time. This is an incredible and magnanimous time to be alive. But from our vantage point in the Western world, we are also waiting for some of the rest of the developing world to catch up to the current situation. And once they are caught up, it's really gas on the throttle from there.
Absolutely. You and I must be telepathic, or we just worked a lot together because you sort of interpreted where I was going to go with the next question. So let's stay on this Ben with Venezuela for a moment, SG, if I may. So you're talking about the air and ocean strikes. We know Maduro's days are numbered. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the public perception out in the mainstream think that this is cynically just a land grab and mineral rights, but we know it's far more extensive than that. So here's the two-part question. Do you think Humberto Gonzalez is going to become Maduro's successor? And how significant is this not only for the sovereignty of the good Venezuelan people, as you said, have been subjugated by their own corrupt government for far too long, but what does this mean for the sovereignty, the nationalization of the country, and their currency, specifically the bolivar, coming back onto the international stage?
Well, really, and not being a financial expert, my terminology may be a little crude as I describe this, but really what's going on in Venezuela right now is a forced and accelerated version of what has been going on quietly in the background inside of Iraq, in my opinion. What you have is a forced disconnection from a rump state style economy. And that includes everything from internal corporate loyalties and how tax dollars inside Venezuela actually flow, both Bolivar and USD. And it also includes external influences, governments, paramilitary groups, corporations that have headquarters outside of the country or even off of the continent, things like Chevron, for example. And so all of this ties back into the economic malaise that has been going on inside Venezuela, at least for 35 to 40 years in its current form, that took the crown jewel of South America and turned it into a swamp, essentially. And so the question that you asked a moment ago, do I think Gonzalez will be the successor? I really don't know. It would not surprise me if we saw Gonzalez step into the role as a successor, because we know that President Trump has been utilizing individuals who he believes can be most cooperative and rapidly, sort of roll out a type of Trumpian style agenda in line with what his administration is wanting. He propped up Javier Milei with respect to rhetoric and support in the Western Hemisphere. He's was seen several times with Bolsonaro out of Brazil. He's put out posts to Imran Khan over the last 4 years. So this is a man who's not unaware of the usefulness and the necessity in many regards of some of these individuals in various positions, even with flaws that they may have. Ultimately, I think the changeover in power inside Venezuela is going to be as a result of significant internal pressure that drives Maduro to flee the country. And I could see Maduro sort of going the way of Bashar al-Assad, right? We had some rumors that Assad had been interdicted, Then we had some rumors that Assad was still in the country. And then a few days after many of those rumors began to settle, we saw some proof actually coming out from Moscow where Assad had actually fled to and gotten to safely with the help of the Russians. I could absolutely see Maduro sort of taking a similar a vector as this process gets a little bit more intense, because those that are around Maduro are really the target here. We're not going after the figurehead, although that's the target of the rhetoric. That's the focus of a lot of the rhetoric right now, both from the Trump administration and from the Western world media. But the real threat is the orbit that surrounds that figurehead. And so if that figurehead can Judas goat some of that orbit out into the light and allow that orbit to be exposed not only to the mass media in the Western world, but also to the Venezuelan people in a way that they cannot sort of argue against, we may see some significant events. And I would not rule out a military coup as a way to prevent a U.S. invasion.
That's a good point. And then you also wonder on the side of all this, if Venezuela had anything to do with the Dominion servers in the 2020 election fraud as well. So it's an interesting sub point, I think. SG, there's a lot of leaks concerning the arrest of, we know we're just kind of optically here. We know behind the scenes a lot of this already happened, but concerning the arrest of Barry Soetoro and Big Mike, amongst others, are dropped seemingly in daily comms by President Trump. We all know it's inevitable, it's coming. What can you share with us concerning the activity on this and the timeline for the public arrest and the execution of this scumbag, as well as other henchmen Kabbalists that he has supported over the years?
My goodness, that's another above my pay grade question, I have to say. I would have thought that we would have seen some more dragging out, some more justice with respect to that particular individual prior to this point. I'll fully own that. That's been an expectation of mine that I was a little bit wrong on over the last 16 to 18 months. But with respect to how things have played out, I think as we look over that period of time, this is clearly building towards an epic and original moment in the United States, in the history of the United States of America. You know, having a former president on trial for treason against the Republic by a military commission, which is what the current president has said is going to occur multiple times, or at least is hinting as much throughout that Truth Social posting and other communications that he's given us over the last 2 to 3 years. This is completely original. This has never happened before in American history. As far as a timeline, at this point, I would look at that process of destabilization concurrent with that financial changeover that we sort of talked about earlier, right? What are the forces that are actually behind the resistance to these changes? Those forces really tie back to a number of different groups, but those groups are fairly concentrated and insular. The Clinton Foundation has a tremendous amount of financial and blackmail control over Washington, D.C. The Obama Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations are both known for investing into biotech and biological agent development all around the world, as well as child-focused projects. And I'm not going to get too sordid with some of those details for your audience out there. The Open Society and the entire network that ties back to that, of which Arabella Advisors is one of the main junction nodes. And Arabella Advisors has ties to JP Morgan, to Wall Street, to all of the major financial players in the real estate world, in the hedge fund world. So the insular locus of facilitative control is not as enormous as a lot of us, I think, would think. But getting the web of that control removed, that takes time. That's a huge, vast net that has been weaved there, right? This takes a long time to undo those threads and get those threads out of every arena of society. You're talking about academia, healthcare, finance, business, commerce, international and domestic trade. You're talking about foreign policy, deep state bureaucracy across all levels of state and federal government being bankrolled by a lot of the same people. And this is just an overly simplistic and probably for your audience by this point in time, probably an annoying fact, but it is true. And so as we develop that process out, it will eventually arrive at serious human rights abuses and what we would characterize as war crimes or crimes against the American people. And overthrowing the government of the United States, which I believe is what's going to eventually have our friend Barry on the block, if you will, that is a military crime that will have to have a military response of some kind. And we've already seen President Trump tell us again that these tribunals are going to be televised, and this is going to be a moment in American history where they will have to choose how they want to proceed forward. It makes a great deal of sense that those events would carry themselves forward at around the same points in time that we see the financial world really beginning to break away from the debt slave system that the entirety of that corruption is seeking to protect.
Yeah, exactly. And it sure seems to be purposely timed, looking sort of the outside looking glass, if you will, SG, for the midterms. Not saying it's going to take the whole year, but I'm just saying like the timing is the geopolitical financials seem with the golden age of 26, all leading to the midterms so they get the maximum amount of exposure and embarrassment to the deep state, to your point. Finally, SG, sort of an esoteric question, but I think a timely one nonetheless. We're now obviously less than 2 weeks away from Christmas, with the holiday season, for travel with our respective families. I'm hearing reports that the climate at the airports is changing, specifically with respect to shorter lines, less TSA agents, travel restrictions, depending on which airport you go to. However, the issue of AI and facial recognition remains. Now, personally, not going to participate in that, but unfortunately, I think some of the public largely will go tacitly along with this. What are you hearing on all this front? And is all this an internal change quietly of a movement of Doge from within?
Well, it's interesting from a Doge aspect. From what I understand, Doge as an official presence, as an official declaration, is no longer in operation. But we have to keep in mind that even during the period of time where Doge was actively, purging the federal government and making this enormous social media and press media blast about all of the fraud that it was, finding and eliminating, and really opening people's minds to just what was going on out there, we saw a lot of federal and state lawmakers that came out and said, we need a sub Doge for this, or we need a sub Doge for that, or we need to set up our own Doge. And that does not necessarily mean that all of those instances are going to receive continual press coverage. It would not surprise me, actually, if we were to really go look it up, to find some Doge style agencies or groups set up at the state level across the United States over the last 6 to 8 months, whether they're private, whether they're public and government declared. I think that would be up to the researcher, but I'm just saying it would not surprise me. With respect to the broader changeover that's happening, though, and what you just described there, the leaning out of the TSA, the thinning out of some of the federal bureaucracy, I think we've got some holdovers that are now finally beginning to show themselves up, not so much from a Doge aspect, but from a federal shutdown aspect. We had a number of weeks where there was a shutdown that allowed for termination of a lot of different bureaucratic positions and jobs. We allowed a lot, or we had the opportunity to trim a great deal of fat. That fat is eventually going to, like you said, matriculate and percolate through the system. And the other thing that's going on here with respect to that is you do have AI that is coming in and helping to streamline some of those processes. And I want to actually drill down on this note if I can, just for a hot second, because this one is very near and dear to my heart, and it really tests the boundaries of how far I'm able to see the plan, if you will, and continue to trust that plan. And it's with respect to the technocratic maneuvers. And it was explained to me like this not that long ago by someone who has a great deal of experience in transnational criminal interdiction work over the last 35 years of working in that arena. And this individual said to me, in response to my complaining about the overuse of technology and AI and the implementation of what clearly appears to be this, this sort of march towards digital surveillance, even though we are seeing some of these bureaucratic arenas gutted and taken out. And this person's response to me was very simple. The response was that the invasion that occurred to the United States of America did not happen in 4 years. It happened over the last 40 years. And so looking at all of the different angles that have to be accounted for and then removed, all of the different component problems that are here domestically in the United States and have to be removed and tracked, what is going on with the AI component, the broader digitization of the landscape, the continual marching forward of that surveillance apparatus is now being leveled at the actual wrongdoers and not the innocent American people who it was leveled at for a very long time, who it was, quite frankly, who it was created for. And so essentially the trap that was built, the landscape that was designed to imprison the populations of the Western world permanently in a digital slave state, is actually being leveraged in its capacities and its powerhouse capabilities against the very designers that brought that system into its initial birthing and development to begin with. And so the surveillance that you described a moment ago is not only happening to the average ordinary Joe, who I agree should not have their constitutional rights abridged just because they want to get on an airplane and travel, to go see grandma for the holidays, but it's also finding the human trafficker who's been wanted by the FBI for the last 9 years and who nobody could identify publicly because they're very slick and they're very slippery, and sometimes they use masks and things like that. So this is a war for the keeps, if you will. This is a war for all the marbles. This is a period of time where the United States is realizing that the domestic issues that it has are much, much greater than most of the American population thinks or has thought over these last many years. And so from here, I think we're going to have that moment where we have to ask the societal questions, the big questions about how we want to proceed forward on the other side of the handling of some of this corruption. And I think a digital Bill of Rights and some sort of codification against digital surveillance and digital slavery ad hoc has to be part of that broader process, or we cannot build the future of tomorrow.
Yeah, again, I thank you for the explanation. I'm not going to participate. I'm going to opt out of any of that stuff, which is your constitutional right to do so. Just most people don't know, which we're trying to alert them of that. But it sounds like you're saying ostensibly, if I'm hearing you right, SG, that a lot of this ultimate digitization of things is not meant for us. It's meant for the bad guys. It's kind of like Haman on the gallows. At the same time, we need to stand up for our constitutional rights and not be subjugated to the digital slave system, mark of the beast, that they would like to implement. And I think that's kind of where I was inferring with that, as you can see. So there's a fine line, that slippery slope of catching criminality without impinging on our freedoms and constitutional rights, if you will. So that's why I was glad we were able to explore the space. And I thank you for that, as always. So SG, as we conclude, as we always do, where can people find your work? And last words you have for the audience, please.
Well, I can still be found in the same 4 places online. I'm on Rumble at the handle Q News Patriot. I'm not on Rumble by the name of SG Anon. The channel's got about 160,000 followers and a green check mark. I think it's /user/Q News Patriot on the end of the Rumble URL. I can be found on Truth, X, and Telegram. I'm on Truth at the handle Real SG Anon, so REAL SG Anon with a red check mark. I'm on X at THE News Patriot with a blue check mark, and I can be found on Telegram at t.me/real REAL News Patriot. I'm not on Telegram by the name of SG Anon either. And with respect to final thoughts, I think my final thoughts, John, are sort of going to pivot and springboard off of what I was just saying a moment ago. This is a period of time in American history where the trust of the American people is intentionally being strained. Because when trust is strained, it causes a population, however small or large that population group is, whether it's a high school basketball team or an entire nation of people, it causes everyone to slow down and look around and really take account of the things that truly matter. What matters in this particular situation? If there is a breach of trust that has occurred, how do we rectify that? How do we fix that? How do we stop the conditions from reasserting themselves in the future that caused that major breach of trust, which itself then yielded a great deal of suffering to the group that really was avoidable and needless and wasn't totally necessary to the broader expansion of the whole? How can we redesign or better design our trust-based dynamic or our trust-less-based dynamic, however you want to frame that as you go forward? But the point is, the question never gets asked unless the trust is tested. And so that's what's happening right now and has been happening for a number of years and is continuing to escalate. It's now escalating to the point where you see a lot of America First patriots who are sort of wondering how much they should trust with respect to the Trump administration, with respect to the bureaucrats that are around President Trump right now. We can clearly see that the swamp is absolutely fighting back. That's obvious with a lot of the groups that are in the orbit of the White House, even some of them with some consistency as we look at the various flow of money that comes from the administration, approvals and things of that nature. But we also have to remember, and again, to double back on what I was saying just a moment ago, there's coming a time along in this process where the trust is either going to be proven out to be worth it or it's going to be proven out to have been wasted. And I don't think we're going to sit back as a people and find our trust and our re-examination of that trust system completely wasted. I think that this is a lesson that we're learning. I think that it's going to take us to a point of original and unprecedented rapid change inside the United States. There's a drop from our favorite entity online that asks directly the question, at what point can military intelligence take over investigations investigative actions for 3-letter agencies. And then the very next line is what conditions have to be satisfied to authorize that. So in other words, this is possible that we're going to see significant law enforcement activities supplemented and in some cases perhaps even supplanted by military activities of a similar nature, because the corruption is too great and too vast and just not able to be overcome in its current form. And I think you have DOJ building the caricature for that right now. I think these investigations going back to 2020 election fraud that John Solomon has talked about, these investigations of Anthony Fauci that the U.S. Army admitted in a 2021 declassified memo, the Criminal Investigative Division of the U.S. Army was investigating Anthony Fauci. Why would that be? Well, all of us know the answer to that. It's because Anthony Fauci committed a war crime, and he's not going to be allowed to get away with that forever. So as we look on the other side of that, will that trust be worth it or will it not? I think that's the point that we're at right now as an American people. And I would acknowledge, admonish the audience out there and everyone watching that it's far more likely that we're going to come out on top throughout this process rather than fighting for our necks and our lives again. And I just don't think that we're going to have to face that type of world going forward. There is a new planet coming. There's significant shifts that are happening all around the world with respect to money, finance, and power. All we have to do is take that broad view, like we talked about earlier on the call, and really see it for what it is. And what comes as a result of that and throughout the rest of this century, I think is going to blow us away when we look back at these times and appreciate just how far we managed to come in a very rapid span.
Agreed. Thank you, SG. And yeah, the Lord I've always known never wastes a hurt, a lesson, or an opportunity, to your point earlier. So we will leave those links as we always do in the description. Customary, folks, we do have a great list of sponsors who make these podcasts possible so we can do this for you with regularity. So please go ahead, check those out and support them. We'll leave those links in the description, particularly Noble Gold, who's running some great specials on metals right now for silver. So the largest delivery of the year is silver in December. So as we see right now, SG, I'm looking at the futures markets. Silver is now almost at $61. So it's moving rapidly to that 75 plus mark that we're anticipating for this month. So SG, thank you for joining the show. As always, we appreciate your time and attention and your expertise. Have a wonderful Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and all of your family. And we look forward to talking with you in the new year.
Merry Christmas, John. God bless all.
God bless.